Hello, everyone. Welcome to part 2 of the Dark Phoenix Saga community review. A few of us have been joined together by Agent 42Q to do a cumulative review of the Dark Phoenix Saga, which I believe is X-Men 129 through X-Men 137 or possibly 138, depending on which volume of the graphic novel you have. Anyway, my job is to look at the second issue in the series, which is the dramatic debut of Dazzler. And this issue is kind of in a minor key when looking back at the whole thing. It kind of continues the build-up of important issues heading into the Dark Phoenix Saga, you might say. The main one being the continual changes, subtle for the most part changes in Jean Grey, and the continual manipulation of her by this character Jason Wingard, who brings her back, or makes her believe he's bringing her back to past lives. Let me switch to that. I should have started with an image of that. So this has been going on for a number of issues, maybe 3 or 4 issues, where he gives her these flashbacks to her previous life. It's very much in the vein of a gothic romance novel, and with overtones of S&M, as she's revealed as the Black Queen here, with her whip and her bustier, etc., her S&M garb. The whole issue, if anything, any kind of tone has an S&M kind of tone. The Hellfire Club, as we're learning more about them, just seem like an equivalent of some kind of kinky secret rich people's club, and the disco that Jean and Scott attend has also kind of a weird mix of disco and punk, and it just has for the time, a bit of the sense of an impending S&M orgy or something, except for Dazzler herself, who does not have that vibe. So anyway, yeah, it moves forward the pieces on the chessboard towards the culmination, and I guess by looking closely at an issue like this, you can see how Chris Claremont and his co-plotter John Byrne were constantly weaving together these little elements which were progressing slowly issue by issue. And of course they're going to come to a head and progress more rapidly when we get deep into the Dark Phoenix Saga. But here we just see the pieces moving forward. So yeah, we learn more about Kitty Pryde. We learn a little more about the Hellfire Club. We see a little more of the mind manipulation being done on Jean Grey. And then we have the injection of Dazzler, kind of an odd character in the mix here. A kind of interesting juxtaposition to all the sense of darkness is that John Byrne's art, at least now in retrospect, strikes me as quite light and almost thin art. The characters tend to be small in the panels, and they don't have a sort of the big dynamic presence that used to be standard for Marvel characters. There is Chris Claremont, and perhaps Byrne with him, refined the sense of soap opera that was always there in Marvel Comics into something different, and something that really did build over many, many months and many years, in fact, and kind of pointed a way towards the future where very long arcs are the norm, and where story elements can play out over periods of years. That was very unusual at this point. And you didn't really, now when you read a comic book, you can tell that's what's happening. At the time you were reading these, you couldn't tell what was happening, and it was a surprise to see the elements come together every now and then when they did in the issues, I think. And that's part of the power at the time of the Dark Phoenix saga, is the slow build to it and the unexpectedness of it, just because you weren't used to comic books building this way. At the same time, this comic book, the reading experience of this is, especially as part of a graphic novel, is dragged down by the need of the writer and the editorial edict of the time to fill you in on so much every issue. So it feels like there's pages of backfill, whole pages given way to just telling you who the characters are, just in case you didn't know, and dialogue where people say, as you know, and then they recount what you already know. Which I think when done really subtly is a useful thing to do in comics, but it's very blunt and on the nose here. They were still believing that most readers each issue was their first issue and had to be dealt with that way. So it's kind of sobering, because I tend to complain about modern comic books. It's kind of sobering to see how much that interrupts the flow of this comic book and makes it harder to read. Oh, and now my computer has crashed. I can't believe it. Okay. I'm asking it to reopen. I'm hoping to get this video done, because I have, I've been trying to talk about this for a while. So part of what makes this a very hard issue for me to talk about is Dazzler. I remember Dazzler coming out. I remember looking at covers, and I did not buy a single issue of anything that had Dazzler in it. When Disco was big, I was one of those people who hated Disco. And by the time this came out, Disco was pretty much dead. So it was kind of humorous that they thought they were cashing in on a fad, and it was 3 years gone. And at the time, most of their readers would be younger people. 3 years of a fad being gone is a long time. And Disco was a very divisive music anyway, that I think it divided male from female in a way, and it divided straight from gay or urban to suburban, etc. It'd be interesting to have a comic book that actually deals with all those divisions. But just trying to have a hero that is supposed to be so cool because she's a disco queen was odd, to say the least. And it just smacked of bad marketing and bad planning. Maybe I should go back and read all the Dazzler and see that it really was something else. But there's nothing in this issue to make one excited about Dazzler. She shows up and dazzles the crowd and then gets sucked into the X-Men's fight. And then in an issue or two later says, well, I don't want to be part of the X-Men, and leaves. So, yeah, the Dazzler remains one of the great jokes of comic book history. So it's kind of ironic that she is considered part of one of the great story arcs of Marvel Comics history. But one would like to forget that she was there. So overall, I'd say for me, that was a much older X-Men issue that I was looking at. For me, this reminds me of the weaknesses of the old way of doing comics, and shows me kind of comics in the middle of evolving into something that we're more familiar with now, with the long, complicated arcs. But you also see, if you look at it from the right angle with the right perspective, you see here how no one still beats Claremont for the density of soap opera interconnectedness that he sets up over really long periods of time. Now comics, even taking away all the unnecessary material that's in here, so to speak, for a graphic novel, there's a lot more density, and the layers are built up much more carefully than in a current comic. So I can definitely say I recommend people reading the Dark Phoenix Saga, but don't let yourself get put off by the first few issues before you get fully sucked into it. And don't let yourself get put off by the clunky way that the story had progressed back in these days, as they were attempting to still write towards the rules of the single issue world and yet create this long saga. I guess on another note, I was surprised that I did not like the John Byrne art as much as I thought I would. And I think he did much better art later in his career in retrospect. And maybe this is a particularly weak issue. But there's the occasional good splash or cover. But a lot of the panels seem like, in a sense, the first thing you could think of or whatever. They're just not very dynamic. They're not very interesting compositions. They're doing the work they have to do, but no more, no less. And it crashed again. Okay, well, I'm going to call that the end of my video. Thanks very much for watching, and I urge you to continue to watch the rest of these videos. I will, as they come along, I will put links below to everything, well, to the video that precedes me and then to everything that comes afterwards. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.